Well, welcome everybody. We're very pleased to have two such distinguished guests with us here this afternoon to talk a little bit with you about the American Theater Wing and also about careers in the arts. I'm going to introduce them for you so you can hear just a little bit about them and then ask them some questions, and then towards the end we'll turn it over and you can ask them questions. We have with us today Lauren Doll, who is a producer, and she is the head of the New Time Productions. She most recently produced Memphis, the hit musical currently playing at Broadway's Shubert Theater.
You should all come.
Yes, and also last season's Tony Award-winning revival of Alan Ayckbourn's The Norman Conquests, the national tour of Frost Nixon, and the 2007 Broadway production of August Wilson's Radio Golf, which is the final play in his 10-play Pittsburgh cycle about the African-American experience. She served as an associate producer on the revival of Brian Friel's Faith Healer, starring Ralph Fiennes. And she was the coordinating producer for Brooklyn the Musical, Broadway tour, and executive producer of the Partnership Producers 4. Her other Broadway credits include the Dunmar Warehouse McCarter Theater production of Elektra with Zoe Wanamaker, Squonk, and On the Waterfront, and off-Broadway, Jody's Body. As a theatrical consultant, she has worked on 39 productions on Broadway and in London's West End.
Boy,
So
it
welcome.
sounds really good when you say it.
Yeah. And here we have Mr. Howard Sherman. Howard joined the American Theater Wing as the executive director in 2003. Immediately prior, he spent 3 years as the executive director of the Eugene O'Neill Theater Center in Waterford, Connecticut, overseeing the center's educational and developmental programs. Students, for those of you that don't know, the O'Neill Theater is one of the premier places to have new play development programs. They have a wonderful new play development program there for the budding playwrights among us. He also shepherded more than $1 million worth of physical plant upgrades and the rebranding of the O'Neill through a coordinated communications initiative. Mr. Sherman was the managing director of the Jiva Theater in Rochester from 1998 to 2000, where he completed a $6 million capital campaign and opened the company's 135-seat Next Stage. He was the first general manager of the Goodspeed musicals from 1994 to 1998, working on 24 new and classical musicals, including the U.S. premiere of Alan Ayckbourn and Andrew Lloyd Webber's By Jeeves. As public relations director of the Hartford Stage, he represented 50 shows, including Marvin's Room, Other People's Money, and Our Country's Good, prior to their New York runs. He began his career in press positions with the Philadelphia Festival for New Plays, Westport Country Playhouse, and Manhattan Theater Club. He has taught and/or guest lectured at the Yale School of Drama, North Carolina School of the Arts, Hart School of Music, and the University of Connecticut, and he is a corporation member of the Neighborhood Playhouse, as well as being on the National Board of Advisors of the Actors Fund and the Board of Directors of Broadway Cares Equity Fights AIDS. He's also served as an on-site evaluator for the National Endowment of the Arts and is a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania. So welcome. Pretty good. Thank you very much. Before we get started, some of our students, they probably know that the American Theater Wing is responsible for the Tony Awards, but they're probably not aware of the many other things that that organization does and is responsible for. And I was hoping maybe you could tell us just a little bit about the American Theater Wing.
I could do the entire hour. Well, let me ask you all simply, have any of you ever happened to visit AmericanTheaterWing.org? So at least a couple of hands have gone up. Our website is actually now our primary means of feeding our programs out. The Wing has focused itself around a mission of helping people to find out more about how theater is made in the words of the people who make theater. So our programs include a television show that we've been doing in New York City for, this will be our 31st season, called Working in the Theater, which are panel discussions with theater artists talking about their work. They're really thematic discussions about the nature of being an actor, a designer, a director, a playwright. We have what was a radio series, now a podcast series called Downstage Center, which are one-on-one interviews with theater artists talking at length specifically about their own careers. We have a number of other programs, including our new podcast video series called In the Wings, which is really focusing on disciplines in the theater outside of the spotlight, the people who are not in fact, actors, directors, playwrights, not the people you usually hear from. So there are those programs which are media programs, and then our other key programs, which would probably have the most meaning to you all most immediately, a program called Springboard NYC, which is what we call a 2-week college to career boot camp for primarily performers who are looking to make the transition from the academic world into the professional performing career world. And we'll talk hopefully a little more about that. And the theater intern group, which is really geared more towards administrators who are people who may have internships in New York theater offices, be they commercial or not-for-profit, but to help get them out of their offices, away from the Xeroxes, away from the answering the phones, and to hear more about the different disciplines in theater, hopefully from people who are not more than 8 or 10 years ahead of you. As we always say, if they're my age, they're too old to be a guest at Springboard. So that you're not hearing from the grand masters of the field, who are great to hear from, but the fact of the matter is Hal Prince cannot tell you how to get a job in theater anymore, because he got his job in his case, in a very unique way, but he got that job 60 years ago. So that's the fast run through the programs, and I think we'll talk more about it as we just talk theater.
Absolutely, and we'll also have brochures for all of these programs available at the reception, which is immediately following our interview today. There are many different paths to success in the field of the arts, and I was hoping that you would each tell us just a little bit about how you got to be who you are, and the path that you went on, how you got to be a producer, how you got to be executive manager of the American Theater Wing. What was your path?
I go first?
Yeah, sure.
My path was as a dancer. I grew up studying dance, and I actually did not have an education such as you're getting. I worked as a dancer, and then I transitioned into musical theater in New York, and after that, I had a dance injury, by the way, and so after that, I started changing what I was interested in, and I started learning more disciplines, and one woman I worked with had written a script which I really thought was great. And because I had been a performer, she said, could you help me find an agent? Now, the agents are very different for playwrights and performers, but be that as it may, I read the script and I said, I really like this. Would you let me produce it? And she took a leap of faith, and I took a leap of faith, and that was my first experience doing a reading. And from there, it just grew.
Great.
I don't think I can do it that quickly.
That's okay.
I starred in all my high school plays. I did one show in college, and at the end of my first semester sophomore year, just realized that I didn't have what it took to be an actor. I have no idea if I had talent. I still don't. But I knew that I didn't have the personal strength to put myself forward as a product, and did not have that fortitude. What I knew was that I loved theater and I wanted to be around it. And what I always had the ability to do was talk and write. So I went into doing PR, and even while I was still in college, began doing PR work professionally for theater companies. I was at school in Philadelphia. And I did PR, I graduated in '84, I did PR until '93, the vast majority of that at the Hartford Stage Company in Connecticut. Knew that when I left there, or had said, I shouldn't say knew, wanted when I left there to not ever do PR again. I actually, in my interview 8.5 years earlier, told the people I was interviewing with, I don't intend to do PR the rest of my life. It just happens to be what I do now. I ultimately want to be the managing director of a theater. It took me a while to convince somebody that I had more than PR skills. And first I was hired as a general manager, and then subsequently had a couple of managing director jobs. then I decided the higher priority in my life was actually personal life, and there was this very nice woman who I'd started dating, and she lived in New York, and I lived in Connecticut, almost Rhode Island, and if we were going to figure out if that relationship was going to work out, I needed to move to New York because there was no other theatrical jobs in Waterford, Connecticut, other than mine at that point, and lucked into the job at the theater wing. It really was a case of I was moving to New York. The theater wing had just, their executive director had just left. They had not begun a search. I actually went in on an interim basis to do that job. And then once I was there, decided I would stay. And you know, in case it was a secret, in case it didn't get left out, it worked out with the woman. And you know, so I was able to align my personal life and my professional life in a way that I wanted to. But I have to say, you know, I didn't follow a path that was, and now I'm going to do this, and if I do this, then I will be able to do that. When I went up to Jiva Theater in Rochester, which was the first theater that would let me be a managing director, I did it because I needed that title. I needed that recognition that I, at this point, had learned all of the skills necessary to be the managerial head of an organization. I ultimately was miserable in Rochester, not because theater, it was fairly lovely theater and lovely people. It snows there a bit, in case you haven't heard. And I was lonely. I was very lonely up there. And so I only spent 2 years there, but had I not taken that job, I don't think the job at the O'Neill Center would have been possible, because I was replacing the guy who'd founded the place and had run it for 34 years. And they weren't going to probably hand that to someone who'd only been a general manager. And then you've heard the rest of the story. But you know, I think there are things you can plan for in your careers. I think there are so many things that happen in your careers, whatever you do. I mean, we're sitting here as managerial, producerial types, and I gather many of you may be performers. Many things happen because other people make decisions. They make decisions that may deny you an opportunity. They make decisions that may give you an opportunity. And they make that decision not knowing anything about you. That my predecessor at the wing left had nothing to do with me. It timed out with my wanting to figure out if the woman I was dating was going to become serious enough that we could get married. So you can plan only so much. The trick is to keep yourself open to as many possibilities as possible and have as much background and knowledge as possible that, depending on the opportunity that comes along, you can grab it. If you're so completely narrowed in on one thing, especially at your ages, you deny yourself the possibility that there may be other things that a year or two from now you may think differently about. I'm not suggesting that any of you are pursuing the wrong thing. I don't know you. I'm just saying, no, learn as much as you can. Georgia and I was talking to Lauren and I in the car, and I said, you know, I have an English degree. A lot of people make fun of English degrees. What do you do with an English degree? You know, Avenue Q commemorated it in a song. What do you do with a BA in English? The fact of the matter is what you do is you know how to communicate. And in any aspect of theater, communication is essential, whether it's administrative, whether it's performance, making what's going on known. And then if you can in fact write what you're thinking or feeling, opens up a whole mess of other things. So ironically, no, there's no money to be made by explaining The Great Gatsby to you, which I assure you I'm capable of doing, because I got assigned that in a lot of different classes. But the fact that I can sit here and talk to you now, or frankly talk in any situation about theater, is what allowed me to do the PR. It's what allowed me to talk my way into general managership at a theater that had never had a general manager, and then ultimately convince somebody that I could be a managing director. Can I ask a quick thing? I mean, I always take over these things. Show of hands, how many people here are pursuing performance track? And how many are pursuing a managerial track of any kind? Okay, so it's mostly performers. Great. Well, no, we'll try to talk to you all and do stuff that'll do everything. I just kind of like knowing who's out there.
There is a point that in both your stories that I think is rather interesting, is that you started in one place and have ended up in another. And somewhere along the way, whether it was in school or sort of on-the-job training or trial and error, you acquired those skills in order to learn how to do that, and you stayed open to those opportunities. If you could give one or two pieces of advice to our students about what are the top one or two things that they should try to do, or or opportunities they should take advantage of before they graduate, to kind of put them in good stead to go on this journey that you've been embarking on, what would that be?
You want me to go first on this one?
No, I'll take it.
Okay.
I think there are a couple of things. The first thing is, if you like to be an entrepreneur, that's very helpful in this business because you are. You're the head of your own business. It's you. No matter what part of the business you're in, you're CEO. And I think when you are doing your classwork and working, performing, that's one thing you might think about. Do I like business? Because, as I've said before, you are. That doesn't trump your passion or what you love, because doing what you love is what really gets you where you are. The second thing I think is networking, and Howard and I have talked about this a lot. We readily admit that we're not social in a way that allows us to just go up to a person and say, hi, this is what I do, this is who I am, what do you do? What are you all about? But it's extremely important because any of the fields, as I've said, you're going to be your own CEO. Well, a big thing in any company is public relations. So for a producer, networking is essential. And if someone had said to me when I was in my early 20s, start networking now, I'd be so much more effective at what I do because I have to raise money. And, you know, money doesn't grow on trees. We've all heard that, and it's very true. You need to be able to talk to people. So, again, as you're developing your performance skills, remember that they lead to other things. You know, if you really love performing and it's a good thing for you, think about how you get that into your interaction with other people, because people are very interested in the performing arts. You will find when you go to a party, people would love to hear about what you're involved in, about the show you're doing, because it's interesting and different to them if they sit at a desk all day. So you'll find those two opportunities available to you. But those are my immediate thoughts.
Tell me the question again, because I can just talk, but tell me the question again so I know I'm on topic.
I was remarking about how the two of you both started on one path and ended up in another. So
right.
What pieces of advice could you give, the one or two things that our students could do before they graduate to prepare them for the journey that they're about to take, that you've been taking?
Know about more than just what you're studying, or study more than just what you're studying if you can. And that doesn't mean take classes in it necessarily. Do you all ever read any of the theater chat rooms? Any of you do that stuff? You know, I mean, on the one hand, we love that these people exist. Do you all know what I'm referring to when I talk about the theater chat rooms? There's a bunch of websites that have places where people go on and they post messages about theater, and I saw this, or I went to a preview of that, and I hated that, and you know, this person's terrible, and why'd they hire this person, and oh my God, was the Tony show terrible, can you believe that? And all of these things, and you make yourself crazy if you're a professional reading these things. But these are diehard fans. They're absolute diehards, and some of them are also professionals in the field because they have very insider knowledge about things. And they obviously go to the theater constantly. Now, my job in particular, because of my involvement with the Tony Awards, requires, and I know you'll all say, oh, gee, how horrible for him, requires that I see every show on Broadway. Then the fact, and gives me free tickets. It's, yeah, but, well, you skip some.
Yeah, I do.
You know, I mean, the fact is it's one thing to go to theater when you want to, it's another thing to go to theater when it's compulsory, and when you have no choice in what you see. The fact is we all have opinions. So, you know, 40 to 45 nights a year, I go see a show whether I want to see it or not. Then, because of the media work that the Wing does, the TV show, the radio show, and other things, there are shows that I'll see off-Broadway or regionally so that I'm more informed as the moderator of those shows. So depending on the year, I'm seeing between 75 and 100 shows a year. Lauren doesn't go to quite as many as I do, but she goes to something even more stultifying, which is she goes to readings and workshops, which I'm thrilled I don't always have to go to, because she's seeing work in its very earliest phases, and sometimes she's seeing it because it's someone of promise, sometimes she's seeing it because it is that personal and professional relationship and she has to go. But I cannot do, the reason I brought up the chat rooms and things, I cannot do what the diehard fans do. I really can't go more than 2 or 3 times a week. Why? I want to know what's going on in the news. I want to be able to read books. I want to know what's going on television. I like to see movies. And the fact of the matter is, all of that is useful. Understanding what else is going on in the world, understanding history, understanding politics. One, going back to what Lauren said, it means that when you are at that event where you may be more interesting than most of the other people because you're a performer, it means you can also talk about other things. So you don't just sit there and talk about what you do. But it means that, and for the management people, it means that whether you're talking to board members or other producers or potential investors, you can talk about the world. You can talk as a professional, not as someone who's a theater business person, but as a business person. As a performer, ultimately, if you're being called upon to create characters don't come out of nowhere. Yes, the words are the words that are on the page or on the score that you're given to work with, but it helps you to create that character if you have a sense of a larger world. And because I do a lot of these interviews, I mean, I've never had a performer tell me that, or a director, or even a writer say, you know, they always say, I do research, I learn, I try to understand more about it. And if you're open to those things and you're aware of those things, then you have more opportunity. I mean, I feel like I'm going to finish with a little NBC logo going, the more you know. But it really is true. If you are so completely focused on only knowing musical comedy repertoire, to give you one example, or only Shakespeare plays, you're not going to have the degree of opportunity in any part of this business that you will if you have a broader knowledge.
Thank you. They're snickering because they're sure I bribed you to say that thing about research and writing.
I've never met this woman before in my life.
I did not bribe him to say that. Thank you.
No, it's true. I mean, we know every episode of Law & Order backwards and forwards. We just enjoy it. It's a break, and it's a different kind of acting. But of course, we also watch it and go, oh, there's Dennis O'Hare. Oh, there's, we see theater people all the time because it's shot in New York. So in fact, in that case, watching that show makes us more aware of the talent pool of New York actors. A, who's working, or B, what they've done, and if somebody says, what do you think about so-and-so for a part? Well, we may not have seen them on stage, but we may have seen them on TV. It just gives us a frame of reference.
I'd love to know from both of you, what skill or facet of your education that you acquired somewhere along the way has helped you in ways that you didn't know at the time you were learning it? Because there's always those things with students where they're like, why do I have to learn this? Why do I have to take this class? I'm never going to use this skill in philosophy or calculus or history.
That one's true, you don't. I've forgotten it completely, and there's never been a day. Calculus, trig, no. Philosophy goes right back to what I was just saying. So I'm sorry, but we didn't let you finish the question.
What skill or piece of your education did you actually ended up helping you that at the time you would have thought, no way, I'm never going to need to know this, and then did something ever circle back around and you went, ooh, that ended up being important?
Yeah, first aid.
First aid, that's very true. We find that on our shows all the time.
Well, I think the thing for me, because I was so heavily involved as a dancer, it was all I had done as a child almost. I mean, you know, started class at 8, and then in your teens you were already beginning to audition and perform. So I wasn't exposed to a great deal. I went to the ballet all the time, and my form of reference was who's dancing tonight, who got injured, who was auditioned and got in that company, and how did they audition, and so forth. So my world was pretty, you know, pretty small. When I got the dance injury, I said, oh my gosh, now what do I do? And I was getting older as well, and anyone who knows athletics or dancing knows that getting older isn't a good thing. So I had to think a bit. And what I had done when I was dancing, I had said, what will make me a better dancer? And that was acting class. You know, dance is based on technique very greatly, and there are many dancers who've never taken acting. Well, dancing is telling a story just like playwrights tell a story. So I took acting class while I was dancing and found that I really enjoyed it. So the first thing I turned to was what I enjoyed, which was back to acting class. And what that allowed me to do, believe it or not, wasn't so much acting, but it was to get television commercials. And that's bread and butter for a lot of New York actors, and I suspect Chicago and LA actors as well. And that made me some money. So I wasn't waiting on table. And that allowed me to really study and know where I needed to go next and get the skills I needed.
I mean, I think there are things I studied that I probably don't use. I mean, I honestly don't think I've ever used calculus. I'm still convinced gym class was a waste of time. And traumatic. So it just didn't seem fair. So I'm going to jump completely off your question and just share two very simple thoughts that oddly were something that I never was taught in school, and they were actually phrases my parents used all the time. And you know how there are all these, have you ever noticed these management books? It's like Who Moved My Cheese, or, you know, Management According to Star Trek, or any of these things. You know, and people take these very simple ideas about how you can live your life or do managerial things according to what would seemingly be frivolous ideas. Well, my parents had two phrases they used all the time, and it's startling how useful they are. And I offer them to you, and you'll think about them, I hope, and someday you'll go, you know, he was right.
His parents were right.
His parents were right. The first one was one that we heard from the time we were kids. I had a brother and a sister, and you know, sometimes you'd go to someone and you go, do you mind if I ask you a question? And of course, you know, who can mind asking a question? My parents' answer was always the following: it never hurts to ask. All people can do is say no. They don't suddenly mark you on a list and say, ooh, that's the person who asked that. I mean, yes, if it's got obscenities in it, it's not useful. But the fact is asking questions, asking if you can do something, asking if you can try something, asking because you don't know something is very, very useful. And I find this in my employees, anywhere that I've managed. It's the people who think they know everything, who don't ask questions, that screw up the most, and it's the hardest to fix the problems they create because they often then try to hide them. So, first phrase from my parents: never hurts to ask, all people can do is say no. Then I turned 16, and in my family, as soon as you were old enough to work legally, you had to find a job along with your schoolwork and everything else. And a second phrase came into being because, you know, it was the day you're working, you're punching a clock somewhere. I was working, you know, in country clubs and fast food joints and things like that. And I would check my time cards, and occasionally I'd find small discrepancies between the time card and then what I got paid. And, you know, you're nervous. You don't want to bring that up to someone. You know, they'll think you're money grubbing, or they'll think you're accusing them of something. So my parents' second phrase was better in your pocket than in theirs. What's very interesting is if you combine or mingle these two phrases, it's actually a great ethos for almost anything you're going to face in your life. It is better in your pocket than in theirs. It never hurts to ask. All people can do is say no. And I actually have people come in sometimes, you know, and they say, do you realize I've been here a year and, you know, I'd like to talk about a raise? And, you know, they come in kind of sheepishly, and I'm like, I even accept better in their pocket than in mine because I'm now the boss. So it doesn't remotely answer what I learned in school, because I think what you learn in school often, are facts. You have skills that are honed. You may be exposed to things. I mean, look, I could have loved calculus. I didn't. But, it wasn't a bad thing that I was exposed to it. Again, gym class. But
I'm with you on that.
yeah, but the fact is I keep going back to the idea of being open and not being afraid, and also knowing that that you have value, and making sure that you try to get the most value for yourself is very worthwhile. So again, play with those phrases. Next time difficult situation comes up, think about those phrases. They'll probably help.
Lauren, as I'm looking around the room, I realize that we have several students here that actually have an interest in playwriting and also some songwriting. And I was wondering if you could give them some pointers or some insights about where do you go from here? I mean, we do have some playwriting classes and some classes in dramaturgy, but for the people that are interested in maybe pursuing a career in playwriting and new play development, what advice would you give them?
Well, I wouldn't be as good talking about going from here to there, because when I work with an artist, by that time they either are established or they've gotten far enough where they've had several productions at various levels and they are emerging artists. And so my talk with them is very different, and I can tell you about that. Music is very similar. It's the same thing, and I don't know as much about music as I do about acting or dance. Isn't that surprising? I took piano when I was young, but ripped the book in half because I got frustrated. So, but I've worked with musicians, and on the show that I'm working on now, the man who composed it is David Bryan, and most of you won't know Bon Jovi, but he's from that group. He was a founding member, and he's the keyboardist.
They were really hot when we were your age.
They were here this summer. They all went to go see them at Jazz Fest.
Oh, okay. At Jazz Fest?
Yes, Bon Jovi was
David
at Jazz
does
Fest.
Yeah,
David,
okay.
yeah. Well, David is very disciplined at a variety of disciplines, I should say. But what he said was, I went into a rock band because I loved it. They were my friends. John asked me to do it. But I was always wondering, when is this gig going to be up? Am I still going to be playing at 50 or later? I'm a member of a band. I'm not the band itself. So he took other places in music that he wanted to explore. And part of that was classical, and part of it was jazz, and part of it was musical theater. And he's done a couple of shows, but he really started and just learned as much as he could. He got together with authors, he got together and went to shows, and he looked to inspiration in a lot of places. And he's done a fabulous score. And doing a score for the theater is far different than singing in a rock band or playing for a rock band. So he clearly had a love of music and wanted to be able to continue it throughout his life in some fashion. And he was smart enough to say, I don't know how long Bon Jovi will be together, or if we'll be selling tickets, all that sort of thing.
It's a little bit like chess. He was playing a couple moves ahead.
Right,
Yeah.
right, and that was very beneficial to him. And he was an emerging artist. If I went to see Bon Jovi, I wouldn't immediately say, "Oh, that guy should write a musical." It wouldn't hit me. But as his name got around, that he was starting to do things. Same with Billy Joel and Paul Simon. They took chances. You get an opportunity to be part of it and learn a lot.
Can I follow on that for a second? Which is that I commented earlier about choices. There are choices that you make, choices that are made for you. The key to probably any career, but I've only done this, is while again you can't make every decision for yourself. Sometimes things have to be presented to you. Putting yourself in the position to be in a place where you may have the opportunity you want is important. And talking about, if you talk about a playwright, you talk about composers, very, very few people graduate from college and suddenly find their musical or their play on Broadway. In fact, the number of new plays and new musicals on Broadway is alarmingly small for the number of people out there writing new plays and musicals. But what you can do as you pursue that, there are two things. Number one, if you can find a good mentor, someone who's a genuine mentor, not some, person who purports to be an expert, but somebody who is really good at what they do, take that opportunity. Take the chance to learn from them. One of my favorite stories, you all know 25th Annual Putnam County Spelling Bee? And it was partially company composed by a group, I think they called themselves The Farm, but one of the original cast members, Sarah, I can't even remember her name, she played Logan Schwartz and Grubinier in it. She was Wendy Wasserstein's nanny. She took care of Wendy Wasserstein's kid. Now, I'm not saying take nanny jobs, but what she did was she was in a position that she had access to talented people. And having that and having people, who treat you decently and treat you well and take an interest. And what happened was, of course, Wendy had to go see her nanny's show when she was in it and liked it. And the show was very unformed. And Wendy called one of her very close friends, Bill Finn, and said, Bill, you ought to see this thing. I think you might want to write songs for it. Because it was not originally a musical. And that's, how that came about. So the nanny is probably not the best example, but until it's, as I said, it's one thing you can, if you're looking to be a performer, don't take a job where you think suddenly somebody's going to discover you at the reception desk and put you in a show. But taking jobs where you'll have an opportunity to meet people who can make you more aware of where opportunities lie. If you're a writer, places that you can learn, you can find out where there might be writing opportunities. But most importantly, for the sake of writers and composers, just do it.
Yeah.
Just start doing it and look for any opportunity to get it done. By the same token, in the same way I said look for a mentor, everybody knows more than you do about your play or your musical if you listen to them. Everyone will tell you how to fix it. Everyone will tell you how it could be better. There is learning what is genuine advice that helps you in the vision that you have, and then there are the people who want to shape your vision into something that's not what you want to write. Now, your choice can be, maybe they want to make your work more commercial, and maybe they know how to do that. And then you have to make the decision of, do you want to make money with what you're writing, or do you want to make a statement and create just the thing that you want to do? Those are choices. But have the strength of your convictions as authors to know when to say no to people, when to draw the line. Do not, in your eagerness to get something on stage, say yes to every change that everyone suggests, because what ends up on stage will very possibly not be successful and more likely look nothing like what you thought you wanted
and
to
could
write.
ruin your career.
Yeah.
I have to add to that because there's a thin line. As a commercial producer, as Howard said, there are suggestions that one will make because you can see the shape of what is popular at the moment, or you think will sell tickets, or you think people will have an emotional connection with. And some artists become so involved in what they're doing and so, what's the word I want, protective of their work, that you sort of get a drama queen. And, and professionals who are running a business, which I go back to the business, and have to get a show up in a certain amount of time, et cetera, they don't have time for the drama. So an important thing as a writer too is get to know your producer. It may seem like the greatest opportunity in the world to have someone say, well, let's put your play here or there. But there are not people that know about the art of playwriting. And you'll be shocked how many commercial producers especially don't know nothing really about the art. They just have been a impresario type. That's not the type of person you want. You want somebody who takes an interest in your work. And that's the most important thing. And that allows you to be on top of your creativity and take control of it, but at the same time have trust that this person is actually looking out for you and your work. Because the best thing a producer can do, and this is what my mentor did partially with August Wilson, is he really took an interest in the work, that it was the work that was important. And so as it turned out, he was not a major player when he began, but when the whole story ended, he was the only person who had worked on all 10 of the plays in the cycle, and thus had grown to know August very well from starting with that emerging work and then going through the arc of this entire cycle. And that's really, I think, the type of person that you want to look for. And they're not always in the theatrical index or when you look at a playbill and you see who's produced it. In this day and age, a lot of producers, I'm not one of them, write a check. And because things are so expensive, even a play can be $3 million, or in the case of Coram Boy, it was $6 million. So, they're raising a lot of money, and I lost my train of thought. Oh, and that's, where they're thinking. This is, and he can talk to this better in terms of the nonprofit, because most of the nonprofits really do shepherd playwrights, actors, all talent, creative designers. But the other thing I was going to say was that you never know who it is that's going to really, really key into you. But there will be someone, especially in all of these disciplines. What you're doing is you're connecting with people. That's ultimately what you're doing. People come, they see your work, and if it's a beautiful design or incredible lighting, they're touched in a visceral way. If they, something grabs their heart, obviously they're caught that way. That's what you want to do for people. That's what it is. And if you constantly have your mind on the work and presenting the work as you give it, you're actually giving someone something. If, on the other hand, you're trying to make a few bucks and trying to get the royalties and this, that, and the other, and you get caught up in it, it can ruin your career because it could be a wrong career choice. But the first is very hard. You have to be persistent about getting to know people.
Yeah. As a corollary to that, and that I feel we should end the self-help program of the portion and go to the gossip portion of the program. But I just want to say, and it comes out of PR. PR is a field in which, you're calling people constantly, trying to convince them to do something that you want them to do. But I think, it's emblematic of any part of this field. I was determined not to just use people when I did PR. And as I said, I stopped doing PR in 1993, so it's been 16 years since I've actively been a publicist. I still try, ideally twice a year, to talk to anybody who I worked with regularly in journalism, just to say hi. One, because if I worked with them regularly, I developed some kind of rapport. And that human connection is important and valuable and can be genuine and calculated at the same time. But more importantly, there are those times where, 16 years later, they might be able to help me. And if they have not heard from me in 16 years, it's a little problematic to then call out of the blue and say, I know you can help me with this. Whereas if I've just occasionally kept up, it matters. I mean, if any of you apply to and ultimately are accepted to Springboard, we talk a lot about thank you notes, and how you keep up with people. These things really matter. Especially
with casting directors and agents, because typically they're not going to sign you immediately. And you've got to prove to them in some form or fashion that you are worth their time in terms of an interview so that they can get to know you. So every time you have a showcase, every time you've written something, dropping a note, now they get hundreds of them, thousands of them, so you have to keep it in perspective. But get in the habit of doing it because it's part of the business of being in the theater, whether you're a performer or a designer or really a producer, anybody. I mean, you know, I can't call somebody after 16 years and say, oh, I need $250,000. It doesn't work that way.
And remember details also about their lives.
Yeah.
I mean, some people literally keep notes. I've never done that, but you know, remember the spouse or partner, remember the children. You know, even if it's to go, oh my God, they're how old now? But you know, knowing enough to ask about the kids when you do contact them. Anyway, I joked about going to the gossip portion, and maybe you've got more questions because dramaturgs have always got more questions.
It's true, we do.
But you know,
I'd actually like to open it up and have questions from the students.
yeah, that's where I was going.
I just want to make one more thought about the intern, and that is when you go into interview for an internship, it's as important for you to get to know the person that's on the other side of the table as it is for them to get to know you. Because you've got to make a decision, again, like it's the producer decision. Is this person really interested in me? What does this person do? And is any of that of interest to me? Sometimes there is a rush to be somewhere. Your parents may say, well, what are you doing? Or you've been waiting on table too long. But being selective can ultimately be to your advantage. And do the research. Again, this is really important when you're going for an internship. You've got to know the shows these people have done or the designs that they've done, where they've gone to school, you know, because you are now, when you're sitting in that chair and you're facing whoever it is, you are now in the business. You're not a student anymore. You're there and you're being judged as a business person. So you need to know who you're going to interview with and what they've done and how you would fit into their world.
And there's this fascinating thing called the internet, which makes it really easy. I mean, it's funny, I'm saying it jokingly. I mean, I've interviewed people for jobs at the Wing and people who actually come in and don't know what we do. And I just think,
why?
you know, we have a website that's pretty darned informative. I mean, I'm not sitting here doing a commercial for the website. I'll do that before we finish. But, I mean, if you're looking for a job, know as much as you can about it, whatever that job is. If you're going into audition for a director, know what their shows are. Oh, we had a good experience last night.
I was going to bring that up, actually.
The main reason we're in town is that, if I'm sure you've heard, there's this new wing at the National World War II Museum. And part of it is this thing called the Stage Door Canteen. Stage Door Canteen were nightclubs run by the American Theater Wing during World War II. So we were at a reception, and we were in line getting shrimp, and the guy in front of us, I recognized as an actor named William Sadler. Probably not a name you recognize. Anybody see Die Hard 2? He's the villain in Die Hard 2, okay? He was just on Broadway with Jeffrey Rush and Susan Sarandon in Exit the King, which I blanked about. I'm standing in line right behind William Sadler. I know exactly who he is, and I think, I've just seen him in something. I can't remember what. I'm not bringing up Die Hard, even though I've seen it 12 times. But I'd seen him, interestingly enough, in a play by John Guare called A Few Stout Individuals, which played off-Broadway in a 180-seat theater, and it had a run of about 6 weeks. And I introduced myself to Mr. Sadler, and I told him how much I enjoyed his performance in the John Guare play. And his response was, "You saw that? Tell me your name again." And then he said, "Didn't you see Exit the King?" And I said, "Oh, well, of course," because then he'd reminded me.
And I worked on Exit the King, and I didn't recognize him.
So we were a complete blank. But you know, and here was my recovery. You know, I said, "Of course I did. It was wonderful." I said, "But I always find when meeting people, it's so much better to mention the thing they don't think people are going to remember." And you know what? It's true, because he was stunned that I'd mentioned, because here I was at an event for rich people in New Orleans, mentioning a play he did for 6 weeks off Broadway 5 years ago. So you never know what will endear yourself to someone. And we chatted for a few minutes, and on it went, and that was that. What do you guys have?
What kind of questions do you have? Priscilla?
You mentioned starting as a producer began whenever you read this play. Could you elaborate more on the process you took? Was it your prior experience that made you feel confident enough to take that step, or was it you going forward
First of all, the play moved me. There was something on the page that grabbed my attention and made me want to be involved with these characters. And that was my first exposure to producing, other than being in something that someone else produced. Anyway, I had this, it was on the page, and I wanted to see the text come to live. And so, as I say, I asked the playwright, who was asking me to help her get an agent, if I could produce it. And in New York, Equity has showcases. So new playwrights can have 29 hours to work with actors, work on their play, and then at the end of this, you get to have an audience in to see the reaction. There are also showcases where you can actually charge money, and they're equally as helpful to a producer or a playwright. So what we did was we did the 29-hour reading, and what I did was say to the playwright, who do you see that would be perfectly cast in this? When you were writing this play, did you have a vision? Well, because she went to the theater all the time and was familiar with the artists that were working, she said, you know, Marion Seldes would be right for the mother. And she mentioned a few other people. And I said, well, I guess I need to call Marion Seldes. And I researched and found a path where our work, you know, crossed paths. And she was delighted to read the script. She loves to help new playwrights. It's her business to help new playwrights because that's where she gets her work. And she said, I'd love to help out in this. Yes, you know, I'll do it. And I did that with some of the other actors. So as a result, when I was calling other producers saying, can you come to this, would you see it? I would say, it's Marion Seldes, blah, 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 Jessica Heck, and they would say, that's quite an incredible cast. And they immediately thought, well, the play must be terrific. Why would these people do this if it wasn't terrific? So a number of the commercial producers, you probably don't know the name of Daryl Roth, but she works with Edward Albee a lot. She did 3 Tall Women, and she's a prolific producer. She came to see the show, as did a number of people of her ilk, if that's the right way to phrase it. And although none of them helped me produce the play, and the play never was ultimately produced in any other fashion, I could call Daryl Roth. I mean, she didn't know me that well, and I had to be careful to send the postcards and, you know, all of that. But that was my journey anyway.
Let me do an aside. Do any of you actually know who Marion Seldes is? A couple of people, yeah. This will be a commercial for the Wings website. Go and find the interviews we did with Marion Seldes. Marion Seldes made her Broadway debut in 1947, directed by John Gielgud. She was in the original production of Death Trap on Broadway for every single performance for 5 years. She never missed a show. She is a legend in the New York theater community. She taught acting at Fordham for many, many years. I think it was she did both, Juilliard and then Fordham. Yeah. You're right. And she's this amazing lady. She's in her early 80s now. Just listen to this lady talk about acting. It's the most mind-blowing thing in the world. So just somebody you should know. I mean, we were talking about things you do and don't know. You know, this business, of course, is fleeting. It's evanescent. The show exists and then it breaks apart, never to be seen again. Yes, it can be recorded, but it is fundamentally changed when it's recorded. Knowing the history, knowing the tradition, knowing some of the people that came before is the fun part of this business. You know, I wish you had Hal Prince sitting here, not me today, because Hal Prince has got much better stories than I do. But having the opportunity to hear these people whenever you can and understand their experiences will help you. And that actually is part of what we're trying to do on our website, is just give you a way to do this for free so you can hear all those folks. But Marion came up and I just assumed she was somebody not many people knew.
And one thing about this program that the Wing provides is I don't know, I assume that most of you know there's an agent, there's a casting director, and you know all of that for those of you who are in performance. You have to remember, again, going back to the business, that when you walk into the door and the casting director is sitting there and the producer is sitting there and other people, the director obviously and the assistant director, the casting director, although he is now casting for that particular show, he's casting for everything he'll ever do. And when you walk in the door, he immediately says, oh, blonde, blue eyes, over here. African American, right here. Asian, right here. He knows the playwrights and what they're doing and how to mix people and communities to make something look real on stage. So your job when you walk in is to realize that this guy's going to be your friend or your enemy for life. Because if you are chewing gum or you're stumble in with things flying all over, or, your worst nightmare.
You start talking about the bad day you're having.
Yeah, bad hair day, So, but just I didn't mean to.
No, but it's right. It's actually it's one of the springboard messages. Always be the best self you can be, because you are being judged from the moment you walk in that room by everyone in that room.
Right.
They want to know not only when you audition are you talented, but do you seem like someone who A, is going to be professional to work with, and B, somebody they might want to work with?
Yeah.
Does the director want to lock themselves in a room with you every day for 4 weeks? Do they think you will mesh well with the rest of the cast? If you walk in and you're a basket case and you're making excuses for what went wrong earlier in the day, or you had stomach flu the night before, or whatever it is, it does not help you. Always, always, always. Whether it's a meeting, whether it's an audition, whether it's, I can't say sitting in this room because I'm not meeting you all personally, but, whenever you have a sit down with someone, be the best yourself you can be.
And on the flip side of that, you've got to remember that the people sitting behind the table who you are doing the audition for, a lot of us have been where you are. And we know, oh my God, I've got to sing an A flat, or whatever the case may be. And we understand that you're nervous. This is something that's important to you because you are auditioning in front of the casting director, or it's a job that would help you get from here to there. We do know all that, and we want your artists, and we are the people that help artists do their thing. So keep that in mind. If you mess up, you mess up. And that doesn't mean that we won't take a second look. It's only when, you're chewing gum, or I don't know why I say chewing gum. I've never seen an actor walk in chewing gum. But in any event, if you're not presenting yourself in the best light, that's really what we look at. Not, if there's a problem and you don't know the line or something of that sort.
The question, James.
Hi, I'm James McBride. I'm a theater business major. It seems like there's sort of a trend right now in commercial theater where sort of movies that have been big successes in the last couple of years are being turned into musicals. I wonder, from a business standpoint, is there much room for a show as risky as in like Brooklyn, or Memphis, or Carolina Change? In the economy right now, and is that actually something that may be starting to come around with shows like Spring Awakening and Next to Normal doing so well at Tony's and stuff like that?
I think the business is changing. I think that what happened certainly in New York was I don't know how many years ago it was, but New York, 42nd Street, that area, 41st, 43rd, really was a dump and sometimes dangerous, and so people didn't really want to go there. So the 42nd Street Development Corporation started trying to get that together, and Disney moved in. Well, that was a great thing for that area because it helped the theater district in a great way, but it also put on Broadway Beauty and the Beast and all the things that you know from Disney, and that started somewhat of a trend of people needing to know what they were going to see. They needed to know the name, that, you know, they wanted something comfortable. The prices were going up. They didn't want to spend $95 and blow it, you know, because they saw something they didn't think they wanted to see. That happens a lot with the movies, is, you know, okay, we know what this movie is, we'll translate it to a musical, we'll be able to sell tickets, and we'll be able to survive. So a lot of it is about survival. When a commercial producer is looking at something like a Next to Normal or Mamma Mia, well, they didn't know about Mamma Mia. What's another big one right now?
Spring Awakening? It's closed.
Right,
What kind are you
that's
looking
true.
for?
What I'm saying is that a producer has to look at something and say, can I sell this? And that's often at odds with what the creative work is. So that's again why I say finding the right producer for you is so important, but I'm veering from your question. I do think it's a trend that's somewhat coming back to write original music. People are starting to hunger for it. But the problem is in our society, and especially in the economics that we're facing now, people just don't want to take a risk of producing new work because they're going to blow millions of dollars. So I think with Next to Normal and Spring Awakening, they both started off-Broadway where it was less of a risk, and the artists were able to take a little more time and figure out what the work was. So I think what the real trend is to not put something up without really going through it. I mean, I was part of a production of Guys and Dolls last year, and you know, there's really not much that you can do to ruin Guys and Dolls, but we did that. But the producer picked it because he thought it was a win-win situation, and he didn't rehearse it out of town. He chose a director that wanted to do something a little bit different, and it was an $11 million show, and it wasn't open very long. So, you know, it's all about money, really, and realize that you need to go to a place where you don't need to spend a lot of money, because that's where your work's going to be done. And by the time, producers go to a lot of these things, and by the time it gets to workshop or a place where a producer might see it, it's gone through a lot of its development, so that helps a producer decide, oh, should I take it out of town, go to a regional theater? You know, how do I help the development get to a point where it's okay to risk that kind of money?
I want to answer a little of that too. I think, you know, the tendency is because movies are so heavily marketed, people want a recognizable title,
right,
because they have to do less of a job selling it to you. Because if they announce a musical of Shrek or Legally Blonde, you know, you have an expectation of what you're going to get. Whether or not the show fulfills those expectations, it's hard to say, but they feel they've moved the ball forward. It is not unique for Broadway musicals to be based on material from other media. Oklahoma was based on another play called Green Grow the Lilacs. You know, My Fair Lady is based on Shaw's Pygmalion. Fiddler on the Roof is based on the short stories of Sholem Aleichem. Most of this stuff, you know, Cabaret came from Christopher Isherwood's I Am a Camera. I mean, I can go on and on. Most of the major musicals are based on something. You know, the truly original musical is actually fewer and far between. Even Guys and Dolls is based on Damon Runyon stories.
Memphis is original.
Memphis is a completely original, though in fact loosely based on a story of a particular individual.
Not a story, a character.
Okay, I won't talk about her show. Okay.
Sorry.
We'll edit that out. But ultimately, the question where it's dangerous is I think there are people who believe that simply by having the title and the rights to a story that worked in one medium is sufficient, and it's not. So whether it is original or whether it is based on something from another source, it still comes down to the execution. And in some cases, it's being slavishly devoted can be useful, and you deliver exactly what people want. Sometimes, in the case of, one of the great examples, Lion King, who thought, I mean, granted, it's a great cartoon, but who thought it would become what Julie Taymor made out of it? How extraordinary that was, and still is. So it's still about, the art, it's about the creative impulse that happens in the room, or even before you get into the room. Just having a good title is not enough. And right now, unfortunately, yes, there are a lot of people running around getting the rights to lots of things. I'll give you one example from a couple of years ago. There was a musical adaptation of High Fidelity. And I think some people may listen to that CD, if you listen to it, and say, that sounds kind of fun. High Fidelity didn't work. I said, as soon as I heard that was going to be a musical, she'll be my witness, I said, that's a terrible idea for musical. Now, why did I think it was a terrible idea for musical? It's a perfectly okay movie. It wasn't a big hit movie. The title even of the original novel on which it's based is taken from an Elvis Costello song. I love Elvis Costello. But why did I not think it? Because if you've actually read the source material it's based on, it's all an internal monologue by one character. And how do you dramatize somebody's internal thoughts? It's very, very difficult. So it's not enough to have source material that is good in its own medium. The question is, can you translate it into the theatrical medium and have it work?
And one thing I'd like to say to follow up something he said a little bit before he got into is what he just said. I would...
The part where I was screwing up about Memphis?
No, I think it was after that.
Okay.
One other thing is I'd like to poll the audience and ask you, have you ever seen on the side of a bus an ad? Okay.
For a show? Or just
no,
an
just
ad?
an ad.
Okay.
Any ad. Can be hairspray, whatever. Well, that was a show, but let's take soap. In New York, very often the best way to advertise is outdoor because people walk in New York. And the buses are a great place to put a nice ad for your musical. Next question. How much do you think that costs a week? 60? 60,000. Well, that's actually probably true if you're doing a number of buses, but per bus, it's $18,000 a week.
Wow.
So if you take a title that people know,
Keep raising the fares.
yeah. Well, yeah.
We actually have a number of our students have a 5 o'clock call.
Oh, okay.
We need to
Christmas Carol.
transition into the food portion.
The informal reception, yes.
The food portion. But did you want to say one or two things quickly about the internships before we transition to the food?
Well, just, if you're coming to New York to do an internship, commercial or not-for-profit, join the theater intern group. If you're thinking seriously about moving to New York for a performing career, take a look on the website about Springboard NYC and see if you think it's something you would benefit from. I don't think there's somebody looking for a career who wouldn't benefit. I brought it. I just have to do this, especially since I hear there are playwrights. These are galleys. Any day now, we're getting, the Wing is putting out a book. It's called The Play That Changed My Life. I'll do a twofold thing. One, it's really good. It's about playwrights writing about the plays they saw growing up that influenced them. The other thing is if it's appealing to you but you're cash strapped, the Wing is actually running a contest on its website right now. You can write in about the play that changed your life, and maybe you can win copies of the book. But it's really, I know I'm biased, but this was something, but I'll use it as an example to finish. I had the idea for this book 18 years ago. At a time in my life where I didn't know anybody in publishing, I didn't have any access to anybody in publishing, and I carried this idea around with me for years thinking, oh, somebody's going to do this, and nobody did. So 18 years later, it finally happened. Could I have done it in 12? Maybe, but it goes back to the idea of if you have an idea, if you have a belief, if you have a confidence in yourself and continue to pursue whatever it is you want to pursue, someday you can make it happen. And actually, I'm about, holding the galleys in my hand isn't the same. When I finally crack open that box of books, I'm going to be really, really proud. So.
Thank you so much. I was going to clap.